Okay, so we're diving into work-life balance this time.
Hmm.
It feels like every other week there's a new article, a new study, a new life hack. It's a lot. We're sifting through it all today, right?
Yeah.
Turning that information mountain into hopefully something a little more manageable.
Absolutely. We're zeroing in on 5 key strategies for finding that sweet spot between, crushing it at work and, well, being present as a parent. No easy feat. But the goal here is to make these ideas work for you, your life, your rules.
Love it. Let's get practical. First up, and this one's a biggie, setting boundaries. Everyone says it's crucial, but easier said than done.
Right. Like my box doesn't magically disappear at 5 o'clock just because it's family time.
Exactly. So how do we actually make those boundaries stick, especially when work bleeds into, well, everything?
It starts with understanding the why. And it's not just about minimizing distractions during dinner. It's about protecting your mental bandwidth, your energy. One study we came across actually linked a lack of boundaries to a 75% higher risk of parental burnout.
Wow, 75%, that's a lot.
Right. And we all know burnout helps no one. It impacts you, your work, your family. It's about recognizing that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential.
Okay, I'm convinced boundaries are important,
Mhm.
but how do we actually implement them? I mean, it's one thing to silence notifications, but what about those bigger systemic issues like expectations at work?
One thing that came up a lot in the articles was this idea of ritualizing boundaries. Like
Hmm.
one family had this tech curfew every night between 6 and 7 p.m. All devices went into a basket, no exceptions. It became this dedicated time for family, for connection.
I love that. It's like a forced detox, but in a good way. Speaking of detox, my to-do list could use one. Which brings us to tip number 2, prioritizing. But how do you choose when everything feels important both at work and at home?
It's about identifying those non-negotiables. If your to-do list is a juggling act, what are those balls you absolutely cannot drop? Maybe it's that big presentation, but also making sure your kid feels heard after a rough day at school.
So we're talking about those make or break tasks.
hmm
But what about everything else?
That's where delegation and some really honest conversations come in,
Hmm.
especially with your partner if you have one. Can some things be reassigned? Can you tag team certain
Like
responsibilities?
it's about teamwork, which, let's be honest, sometimes feels more like a contact sport. Who hasn't had that, oh, you're still working conversation with their partner at 9 p.m.?
Exactly. And that's why clear communication is so crucial. One thing that stood out was this idea of needs meetings. Basically, you and your partner, you have a standing check-in, maybe weekly, to just lay it all out. What are your individual needs for the week? What are the pressure points?
I love that. It takes the guesswork out of it and probably prevents a lot of arguments. Okay, we've covered boundaries, prioritization, but what about that ever-elusive beast, time management? One article suggested leveraging those early morning or late night hours, but those are my precious sleep hours.
And sleep is sacred. But it's less about sacrificing sleep and more about understanding your own natural rhythms. Like, are you a morning person or a night owl? Figure out your peak productivity times and structure your day accordingly.
Okay, so work with your chronotype, not against it. Because let's be real, trying to tackle my to-do list before my coffee kicks in, recipe for disaster.
Exactly. You got to find what works for you.
Which brings us to our final, and some might say most important tip, being kind to yourself. This one really hit home for me.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of striving for perfection. But one thing all the experts agree on, it's a recipe for burnout. We need to be more compassionate with ourselves.
Easier said than done. So how do we actually make self-care a priority when we're already stretched so thin?
One word, micro moments. Turns out even small bursts of self-care can make a big difference. One study highlighted the power of a 10-minute walk in nature. Just 10 minutes. It significantly reduced stress hormone levels.
See, this is why I love these deep dives, those
Yeah.
little nuggets of wisdom you wouldn't expect. Okay, so we've covered a lot. What are your big takeaways?
The biggest one for me is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what works for you, your family, your life, and being open to adjusting along the way. It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes all it takes is a 10-minute walk to hit the reset button.
Hmm.
So for our listeners out there, I'm curious, what are your go-to strategies for navigating the work-life juggle? Is there a particular tip that resonated with you or maybe a strategy you've tried that we didn't cover? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know because, let's be honest, we're all in this together, figuring it out as we go.